This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken took shelter with Benjamin Netanyahu in a bunker during an air raid alert on Monday. The U.S.'s top diplomat returned to Israel on Monday in hopes of securing progress on the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Blinken is also seeking to prevent the conflict spreading as he travels around the Middle East in the aftermath of Hamas's October 7th attacks that killed 1,300 people. Israel has intensified its bombardment of Gaza ahead of an expected ground assault. Reuters correspondent Lucy Fielder reports.
Gaza residents said the overnight Israeli strikes were the heaviest in 9 days of conflict since the attack on Israel by Hamas militants that killed 1,300 people. The bloodiest single day in the state's 75-year history. Israeli planes bombed 3 headquarters of the Civil Emergency and Ambulance Service in Gaza City, killing 5 people and paralyzing rescue services in those areas, health officials said. Fuel reserves at all hospitals in the enclave are only expected to last another 24 hours, putting thousands of patients at risk, the United Nations Humanitarian Office said early Monday.
Reuters correspondent Lucy Fielder. The European Union will launch a humanitarian air corridor to Gaza through Egypt, with the first flights expected this week, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Monday. Earlier Monday, Egypt and France's foreign minister urged the delivery of humanitarian aid and the exit of foreign nationals from the bombarded Gaza Strip as the war between Israel and Hamas entered its 10th day. The UN says 1 million people have been displaced inside Gaza. This is VOA News. European Union heads of state will hold an emergency meeting Tuesday on the conflict between Israeli forces and Palestinian militants in Gaza. As Henry Ridgewell reports, the mounting death toll has exposed divisions in the European response.
Visiting the Kfar Aza kibbutz Friday in southern Israel, where Hamas killed dozens of civilians, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen offered unequivocal support.
Israel has the right to defend itself. In fact, it has the duty to defend its people.
Following that speech, the chair of the European Parliament's Security and Defence Subcommittee, Nathalie Loiseau, wrote that von der Leyen was forgetting an important message. Israel must respect international humanitarian law. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
The U.S. will offer migrant families separated at the U.S.-Mexico border under then-President Donald Trump temporary legal status and other benefits while barring similar separations in the future, according to a summary of a settlement agreement filed on Monday. The agreement currently applies to some 3,900 children separated from their parents during Trump's 4-year presidency that began in January 2017. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, which represents separated families in a lawsuit first filed in 2018. U.S. Representative Jim Jordan appears to be quickly shoring up support to become the next House of Representatives Speaker. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
I think we're real close.
One by one, Jordan's been peeling off detractors who see him as too extreme, helped in part by backing from Donald Trump and his allies.
I feel real good about the momentum we have.
In a letter to GOP colleagues before a closed-door meeting, Jordan pledged to bring all Republicans together if elected, 2 weeks after Kevin McCarthy's stunning ouster. A vote on the House floor could still take several rounds, with several Republicans still refusing to back Jordan. He'll need nearly the full majority of colleagues behind him. Sagar Magani, Washington.
Partial results from 96% of voting districts in Poland's general election have shown majority support for opposition parties. Those 3 parties are promising to repair the nation's constitutional order and its relationship with allies, including the European Union and Ukraine. Voters turned out in droves on Sunday to make their voices known after a bitter and emotional campaign. Officials said Monday's turnout was nearly 74%, the highest in 34 years of democracy, surpassing 63% in the historic 1989 vote that toppled communism. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari said on Wednesday a failed Islamic Jihad rocket launch caused the bombing of a hospital, killing 500 Palestinians in the blast at a Gaza City hospital on Tuesday.
That an analysis of the IDF operational systems indicates that a barrage of rockets was fired by terrorists in Gaza, passing in close proximity to the Al-Hali al-Ma'adi hospital in Gaza at the time it was hit.
Health authorities in the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip said that an Israeli strike caused the blast. As Israel appears to be preparing for an invasion of the Gaza Strip, the Lebanese militant political group Hamas has said that would provoke entry into the war, a promise that would inevitably drag Lebanon into a costly and complicated war. Jacob Russell has this report from Beirut.
Hezbollah appears to have little interest in assuaging the concerns of other Lebanese. Speaking anonymously, a senior commander recently told VOA News that the party has units in Beirut at full readiness to defend its supporters from other Lebanese factions. He said, quote, "If necessary, we can take over this country in 24 hours." Lebanon is still reeling from a profound socio-economic crisis and could ill afford to rebuild after a war. Internally, the long-term consequences of war would depend heavily on Hezbollah's ability to secure funding for reconstruction. Jacob Russell for VOA News, Beirut, Lebanon.
Egyptian aid trucks moved closer on Tuesday to the only crossing into Gaza not controlled by Israel, but without an agreement in place to deliver relief. And with the Palestinian side closed, it's unclear when it might get through. This is VOA News. Police in Belgium have killed a man suspected of being an extremist who opened fire on soccer fans in Brussels on Monday. AP correspondent Jennifer King reports.
Belgian officials say a man sought in a Brussels shooting that killed 2 Swedish soccer fans and severely wounded another was shot dead by police as they tried to arrest him in a neighborhood not far from Monday's incident. The gun he used has been recovered. Belgium's Prime Minister Alexander De Croo said he's extended condolences to the family through Sweden's Prime Minister. Officials say the man is a 45-year-old Tunisian who was due for a hearing after he threatened a person in an asylum center. He posted a video laying claim to killing 3 Swedish people and said the Quran is a red line for which he was ready to sacrifice himself. I'm Jennifer King.
Combative right-wing Republican Jim Jordan fell short on Tuesday in a vote to serve as Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, but more votes were expected to follow that could wear down his opponents. The lawmaker and ardent ally of former President Trump won 200 votes, short of the 217 needed to win the job, as 20 of his fellow Republicans voted against him. All 212 Democrats voted for their leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Republicans who controlled the chamber nominated Jordan as a replacement for Kevin McCarthy, who was ousted as Speaker by a small group of his fellow Republicans on October 3rd. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is back at his civil trial for week 3, continuing to insist the lawsuit and all the criminal cases are witch hunts against him and the presidential re-election campaign. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
More Trump Organization executives testified about the company's property valuations as Trump bragged about them to reporters.
Some of the greatest real estate assets anywhere in the world.
The state attorney general is suing Trump and his company for inflating those values to secure loans.
This is a witch hunt by a radical lunatic attorney general.
And says there were disclaimers on the financial statements.
It says don't rely on these financial statements. Do your own due diligence.
Attorney General Letitia James was in court but did not comment. Julie Walker, New York.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Tuesday that Ukraine's armed forces had used U.S.-supplied Army tactical missile system long-range missiles for the first time. He shared the news in an evening address posted on social media without giving details of when or where they were used. The United States had not previously said publicly it had delivered the missile systems to Kyiv. ATACMS have a maximum range of around 300 kilometers. Earlier Tuesday, Ukraine said it hit airfields in the Russian-occupied south and east of the country overnight. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Israel continued to pound Gaza on Wednesday before sundown. Israel last week ordered some 1.1 million people in Gaza, almost half the population, to move south as it prepares for a ground offensive in retaliation for the worst Hamas attack on civilians in Israel's 75-year-old history. Israel has called up a record 360,000 reservists and has been bombarding the tiny enclave nonstop following Hamas's assault on southern Israel on October 7th, which killed about 1,400 people, mostly civilians. U.S. President Joe Biden has left Israel and is on his way back to the United States, a trip cut short and overshadowed by the explosion at a Gaza hospital which killed hundreds. VOA's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Wadakwasara has details.
Arriving in Tel Aviv Wednesday to show support for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Joe Biden said he was deeply saddened and outraged by the hospital explosion.
Based on the information we've seen to date, it appears the result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza.
Biden said Israel has agreed that humanitarian assistance can begin to move from Egypt to Gaza and announced $100 million U.S. aid for Palestinians. He vowed to provide Israel what it needs to defend itself, but urged restraint in its retaliation.
You live by the rule of law. And when conflicts flare, you live by the law of wars.
Netanyahu thanked Biden for his support. Patsy Wadakuswara, VOA News.
Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi on Wednesday said Egyptians in their millions would reject the forced displacement of Palestinians into Sinai, adding any such move would turn the Egyptian peninsula into a base for attacks against Israel. This is VOA News. News of a blast that's said to have killed hundreds in a Gaza hospital led to Arabs throughout the region heading to the streets in protest as regional tensions risk reaching boiling points. AP correspondent Karen Chamas reports.
In usually stable Jordan, angry protesters lit Israeli flags outside the Israeli embassy in Amman as riot police fired tear gas to disperse the crowds. One protester told the AP, "They're all normalizing Arab rulers. None of them are free. The free ones are all dead." What would have been a crucial meeting between President Joe Biden and Arab leaders fell through after Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas withdrew in protest. In Beirut, protesters aimed fireworks at police protecting the U.S. Embassy, who retaliated with tear gas and water cannons. I'm Karen Chamas.
The Secretary General of Haiti's High Transition Council has been kidnapped, according to the head of the committee, which has been tasked with creating a roadmap for elections, which have been penciled in for next year. Haiti, which last had elections in 2016 and has been without elected representatives since January, is facing a humanitarian crisis driven by powerful gangs who control large parts of the capital and have kidnapped hundreds of people. Local media reported that the official was kidnapped around noon in the capital Port-au-Prince by heavily armed men dressed as police officers. U.S. Representative Jim Jordan has lost his bid to be House Speaker for a second time, AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
In the second floor vote,
the Honorable Jim Jordan of the state of Ohio has received 199.
One fewer than yesterday, as he lost even more GOP colleagues. The next step is unclear, though what is clear is Jordan's path to the Speaker's gavel is almost certainly gone, though allies like Arizona's Andy Biggs hold out hope.
I think people are going to change their hearts and their minds.
But with the House remaining paralyzed without a Speaker, a bipartisan group is floating an extraordinary plan to give interim Speaker Patrick McHenry more power to reopen the chamber and conduct routine business. Sagar Magani, Washington.
A Dutchman who was the prime suspect in the 2005 disappearance of an American woman vacationing in Aruba has confessed to her murder, prosecutors and the victim's family said Wednesday. 36-year-old Joran Vandersloot, as part of a guilty plea entered in a related case, confessed to killing Natalie Holloway on the Caribbean island, they said. Holloway, then 18, disappeared while on a high school graduation trip to Aruba. Her body has never been found. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA.
This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. Israel's defense minister told ground troops to be ready to enter the Gaza Strip, though he didn't say when the invasion will start. Israeli airstrikes have pounded locations across the Gaza Strip, including parts of the south that Israel had declared as safe zones. With authorities working out logistics for a delivery of aid from Egypt, overwhelmed hospitals tried to stretch out ebbing medical supplies and fuel for diesel generators to keep their equipment running. The U.S. State Department said on Thursday it was aware of reports Russia had detained an editor at U.S.-funded Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and said it appeared to be Russian harassment. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller.
This appears to be another case of the Russian government harassing U.S. citizens, which is why we continue to have a level 4 travel warning and encourage all U.S. citizens not to travel to Russia for any reason.
Alsu Kermasheva, who works for RFE-RL's Tatar Bashkir service, RFE-RL said on October 18th, authorities announced that Kurmasheva, based in Prague, had been charged with not registering as a foreign agent. The Russian government did not immediately comment. More than 300 people were arrested for illegally demonstrating, and 3 people were charged with assaulting police after protesters descended on Capitol Hill to call for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Hundreds of demonstrators from Jewish advocacy groups poured into a congressional office building on Wednesday. They wore shirts that read, quote, "Jews say ceasefire now," and they chanted, quote, "Let Gaza live," and "Not in my name," before they were detained by Capitol Police. Demonstrations aren't allowed inside Capitol buildings, and police said they warned the demonstrators in the Cannon House office building to stop before they began making the arrests. You'll find expanded coverage of world news and events at our website, voanews.com, 24 hours a day. This is VOA News. The Guardian newspaper has fired a cartoonist after allegations of anti-Semitic imagery, AP religion correspondent Walter Ratliff reports.
The Guardian newspaper has fired longtime editorial cartoonist Steve Bell after refusing to run a caricature of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that critics say draws on anti-Semitic stereotypes. The decision comes after Bell depicted Netanyahu holding a scalpel and preparing to cut a Gaza-shaped incision in his abdomen. Bell said he had been accused of evoking the pound of flesh demanded by the Jewish character Shylock in Shakespeare's play The Merchant of Venice. He said that had nothing to do with the cartoon, and he would never dream of promoting anti-Semitic imagery. I'm Walter Ratliff.
Ukraine is desperately short of judges and is kickstarting a nationwide hiring spree to fill more than 2,000 vacancies and vet around as many sitting judges for potential misconduct. Reforming the judiciary, even while the country is at war, is a requirement if it's to join the European Union one day. Reuters correspondent Lisa Fielder reports.
2 bodies responsible for hiring and disciplining judges were effectively frozen for years and only recently relaunched under EU pressure. On top of hiring new ones, Ukraine must vet 2,000 or so sitting judges for misconduct. Endemic corruption means few Ukrainians trust the courts. Ludmila Volkova is on the commission tasked with both new hires and integrity checks.
Those who keep their posts, whose competence we confirm, will shape the new era of judicial power in Ukraine.
The judiciary overhaul is part of a broader crackdown on corruption.
Lucy Fielder from Reuters. The FBI alleges that thousands of remote information technology workers who were employed by U.S. companies secretly sent millions of dollars from their pay to help fund North Korean weapons. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
An FBI spokeswoman says thousands of North Korean IT workers were dispatched to work with companies across the U.S. and some other nations, using false identities to get remote worker jobs. And for years, they've been secretly sending millions of dollars of their wages to North Korea for use in its ballistic missile program. Authorities making the announcement in St. Louis say they've seized about $1.5 million and 17 internet domain names as part of the ongoing investigation. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Hundreds of people are being evacuated from their homes, and schools have closed in parts of Scotland as much of Northern Europe braces for stormy weather, heavy rain, and gale force winds from the east. The UK's weather forecaster, the Met Office, issued a rare red alert, the highest level of weather warning for parts of Scotland. It warned that exceptional rainfall Thursday and Friday is expected to cause extensive flooding. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA. This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. Secretary of State Antony Blinken came to the podium at the State Department Friday afternoon with some good news, confirming the release of 2 Americans who had been held hostage for 2 weeks by Hamas militants. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken welcomed the release Friday of 2 American hostages, saying, "We share in the relief that their families and friends and loved ones feel." But Blinken added that there are still 10 additional Americans who remain unaccounted for, and said, "We know that some of them are being held hostage by Hamas, along with an estimated 200 other hostages." Cindy Sain, VOA News.
The International Committee of the Red Cross helped facilitate the transfer of the 2 hostages, transporting the mother and daughter from Gaza to Israel in its role as, quote, a neutral actor between the warring parties. In a statement released Friday, ICRC President Mirjana Speljarek says the release is a sliver of hope.
The release of the hostages in Gaza today is a sliver of hope. We are extremely relieved that the families can now be reunited after 2 weeks of agony. We continue to urge for action to protect and alleviate the suffering of all civilians affected by this devastating conflict.
The ICRC also calls for a pause in the fighting and for humanitarian aid and first responders to be allowed in. Congressional chaos and opposition will be a hurdle for President Joe Biden as he pushes for $105 billion in fundraising for Israel, Ukraine, border security, humanitarian assistance, and countering China. Friday's announcement follows Biden's Oval Office address the night before when he made the case for deepening U.S. support for its allies in the midst of 2 wars. But the chances of progress on Capitol Hill are in doubt because of political resistance and Republican infighting that has left the House of Representatives at a standstill. This is VOA News. An assessment by French military intelligence indicates the most likely cause of the explosion at Gaza City's Al-Ali hospital was a Palestinian rocket, according to a senior French military official. The official says the assessment points to a rocket carrying an explosive charge of about 5 kilograms and possibly misfired. The military intelligence official said Friday that none of their intelligence indicates an Israeli strike was involved. Officials in Hamas-ruled Gaza blamed an Israeli airstrike for the hospital explosion Tuesday. Israel denied it was involved and released live video, audio, and other evidence it said showed the blast was caused by a rocket misfired by Islamic Jihad, another Palestinian militant group. Islamic Jihad denied responsibility. A New York judge has fined Donald Trump for disparaging remarks that the former president had made about a key staffer in the courthouse. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
The judge hearing the civil fraud case against former President Trump in New York did not find Trump in contempt of court, but did issue a fine of $5,000 because an insulting social media post was allowed to linger on Trump's campaign website. A limited gag order now bars the former president and others involved in the case from making personal attacks on members of the judicial staff. Trump was not in court when the fine was handed down, but had been there earlier in the week. I'm Jackie Quinn.
A new study on artificial intelligence being used in the medical community is finding signs of racial bias. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn has more.
Hospitals and healthcare systems are increasingly using artificial intelligence, like chatbots, to help summarize doctors' notes and analyze health records. But a new study led by researchers at the Stanford School of Medicine warns some programs appear to be perpetuating racist, debunked medical ideas. An example: 4 of them failed to respond when questions about kidney function, lung capacity, and skin thickness were asked. One researcher says they're concerned these outdated beliefs may have led to less care for Black patients who complained about pain, who receive less care than whites. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Republicans have dropped Jim Jordan as their nominee for House Speaker, setting them back to square one with no clear plan ahead. This comes after Jordan failed Friday in a third try for the Speaker's gavel. Frustrated and angry Republicans sank further into turmoil with no idea how to end the crisis created after hardliners ousted Kevin McCarthy. Despite Jordan's backing from Donald Trump, opposition to him only grew. More than 24 centrist Republicans revolted over the Ohio congressman's nomination and the hardball tactics being used to win them over. For additional stories 24 hours a day, visit voanews.com. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News.
And I'm Dan Friedel.
This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. Hundreds of demonstrators joined a pro-Palestinian march in Washington, D.C. on Saturday to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza following the Hamas attack on Israel 2 weeks ago, chanting Free Palestine and Free Now. Holding banners and waving Palestinian flags, demonstrators marched from the Washington Monument towards the U.S. Capitol. Similar rallies were planned in cities across the United States over the weekend. As trucks carrying aid crossed into Gaza on Saturday, some Gazans said it was far from what was needed to help over 2 million people currently under siege in the Strip. Emma Gell reports from Reuters.
For many who have been displaced in the growing conflicts, 20 trucks are simply not enough for the enclave's 2.3 million people. Where is your humanity? We need to know what is being done, says this man, who is calling on Arab countries to send help. Before the outbreak of war, an average of about 450 aid trucks were arriving daily in Gaza. The United Nations says more than 1 million have been made homeless. There are no safe bomb shelters in Gaza, where over 50% of Palestinians live in poverty. In Egypt, Arab leaders condemned the siege of Gaza at a summit convened hastily to find a peace settlement. But the absence of Israel and senior U.S. officials at the meeting undermined any prospect for halting the escalating war.
U.S. President Joe Biden said on Saturday that he was, quote, talking to the Israelis when asked whether he is encouraging them to delay an invasion of Gaza. Biden made the comments after attending church services in Rehoboth Beach while visiting his home state of Delaware. Israel has amassed tanks and troops near the fenced border around the narrow coastal enclave for a planned ground invasion with the objective of annihilating Hamas after several inconclusive wars dating to its seizure of power there in 2007. For additional stories, visit voanews.com. This is VOA News. The brother of a hostage freed from captivity in Gaza is expressing relief and concern for the other families. AP correspondent Lauren Brooks reports.
Judith Renan and her 17-year-old daughter Natalie are the first such hostages to be released since Hamas's incursion into Israel. Ben, Natalie's brother and Judith's stepson, has told the Associated Press hearing about their release was a shock.
Media actually found out before we did, and so we were completely taken by surprise.
Hamas has said it released them for humanitarian reasons in an agreement with the Qatari government. But with roughly 200 people still held hostage in the Gaza Strip, Ben says along with his happiness there's a sense of guilt.
There are still Israeli hostages, American hostages, hostages from all over the world. We care just as deeply about those families as we do our own because we know the pain of what's happened.
I'm Lawrence Brooks.
The fallout from the Israel-Hamas war has spilled into workplaces everywhere. People from all ranks have been called out for speaking too forcefully or not forcefully enough, making it nearly impossible to come up with a unifying message when passions run deep on all sides. Islamic rights advocates say much of the corporate response has minimized the suffering in Gaza. Jewish groups have criticized tepid responses or slow reactions to the October 7th Hamas rampage that killed 1,400 people in Israel and triggered the latest war. President Biden is dangling new money for southern border security in an effort to get Congress to approve billions of dollars more in aid for Israel and Ukraine. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
It's not clear if the roughly $14 billion plan to shore up programs and security at the U.S.-Mexico border will bring more Republican lawmakers on board for the foreign aid requests that the president announced in Thursday's primetime address.
I know these conflicts can seem far away.
Biden says the U.S. needs to stop tyranny and deter terrorism.
Making sure Israel and Ukraine succeed is vital for America's national security.
Late last month, the House stripped assistance for Ukraine out of a stopgap government spending measure. Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw says the GOP border security demands really aren't about money. He calls them a policy issue that needs to be addressed with the White House. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Venezuelans became the largest nationality arrested for illegally crossing the U.S. border last month, replacing Mexicans for the first time on record. Figures released Saturday show that September was the second highest month for arrests for all nationalities. U.S. Customs and Border Protection says arrests for the government's budget year ended September 30th, topped 2 million for the second year in a row. Venezuelans were arrested nearly 55,000 times by the Border Patrol after entering from Mexico in September. That's more than double the number from August. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA.